Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Helix. Today we're going to be talking about Modern again, and this time we're going to touch on the ban list, particularly the cards that were already on it before the format really had a chance. So, let's get started. Ancestral Vision is our first card, and the key thing to remember about Ancestral Visions, it's a 1 mana, 4 turns later, you draw 3 cards. Now, where this really fits in is the counter magic decks that can really effectively use cards like this in order to just trade 1 for 1 with your opponent's resources, and then gain ahead a couple turns later with cards like this. The banning of the artifact lands like Ancient Den was an attempt by Wizards to limit the power of Affinity, which at the time of the announcement of Modern was a fringe deck in Legacy. We're all happy to have these cards on the list because Affinity is still one of the best. Another hostile card to Magic is Umezawa's Jet, a 2 mana artifact equipment that allows you to get 2 counters on it whenever a creature deals combat damage. These 2 counters allow you to either remove them for life, -1/-1, or +2/+2. This gives these counters a wide range of different opportunities to use, either killing creatures or just plain out gaining life and putting your opponent out of the race. This means that this is one of the most powerful equipments in Magic's history that can change the tides between creature decks. A deck with Umezawa's Jet and a deck without is much more favored for the deck with the Umezawa's Jet if it can ever land any creatures, meaning that Umezawa's Jet is one of the most game-defying cards that's on the ban list. Speaking of, Skull Clamp is deemed one of the most powerful cards in Magic's history. Skull Clamp is a 1 mana and 1 to equip artifact that allows you to give your creature +1/-1, and when that creature kicks the bucket, you draw 2 cards. Not only does this make all your 1/1s or X1s into draw power, it also means that your creatures all come with value if your opponent has to deal with them. The power that Skull Clamp provides means that there's no hope for any control deck against it. Basically what happens is that you play Skull Clamp and you have your creatures stacked to it, and your opponent can never catch up. Speaking of catching up, since its Divinatop has been deemed the most time and skill intensive card in Magic, its ability, however versatile, eats up too much time to see any tournament play, and the card barely makes the cut in a Legacy. This might look very simple, but that first ability means for some interesting circumstances, and that last one makes for some key words on very different abilities, such as Miracle, which would definitely be a defining force in Modern if this card was legal. Speaking of cards that can never see the light of Modern, Mental Misstep is a card that epitomizes the Phyrexian Mana's effect on the format. Phyrexian Mana allows you to play cards for less than their sum cost, for the total life that you put into them in intervals of 2. This means that you can play your cards for your amazingly cheap cost, or 0, just by paying a get a life. And Mental Misstep shows this off by being able to cast a 0 mana, countering a 1 mana spell, meaning that you, on the draw, can interact with your opponent on the play in such a degree that makes it to where you have the tempo boost and the extra card. Another gem in the dark depths of Magic is Dark Depths itself. Cards like Vampire Hexmage have made this card a powerful force with the interactions of. Cards like Life from the Loam with Thespian Stage have made this card even more of a force in formats like Legacy. Another interesting card on the ban list that is fairly self-focused is Glimpse of Nature. Glimpse of Nature for 1 mana allows you to get a card off of each creature you cast that turn. This means that the Elf and Elf Ball allows you to get 1 card per elf, and it is this card with the versatility that comes from Natural Order that has made elves into a defining force in Legacy. Dredge Return is a zombify that you can cast from your graveyard by sacking 3 dudes. Why this is so important is it doesn't have a cost for flashing back. Cards that don't flash back for a cost usually mean big troubles for decks like Dredge, where this card fits in perfectly. Dredge allows you to get cards from your deck into the graveyard very cheaply, and cards like this mean that you can abuse your graveyard with great ease, which scares a lot of people, but I don't think that Dredge would make a defining force in the format enough to warrant this card being banned any longer, along with its unfortunately looped-in brother, Golgari Grave Troll. Speaking of being looped in, when Mental Misstep was banned in Modern and Standard and Extended, Jace the Mind Sculptor and Stoneforge Mystic were as well. Thus meant that the format lacked an ability to cogently make these blue-white control decks that it had in the past, excluding Standard where Squadron Hawk was still a force. But in Modern, the lack of this key pillar of control meant that the more aggressive combo decks could go out unnoticed, which resulted in the aggressive banning of a lot of cards after the first Pro Tour, and it would be interesting to see how safe they felt if this card and Stoneforge came back one day. Another aggressive ban in the format was Hypergenitus. Hypergenitus was a deck that used Cascade cards in order to reveal this as your only 2 or less costing permanent or non-permanent in your deck, and this meant that you can get any creature or permanent outside of just a planeswalker, I guess, in your hand into play. This also gave your opponent the same opportunity, but it was assumed that your opponent was investing less into these cards anyway, meaning that they had more ways to cast them efficiently, and you did not. Chromox was the epitome of what they wanted Modern not to be. They wanted Modern to be a slow format that didn't have too aggressive of combo decks, but it wanted the combo decks that it had to be very self-controlled and in the point where they could protect themselves thoroughly. This dismissal of card advantage for speed went against that notion entirely. And the last card we're going to talk about today is also my least favorite to be on the ban list. Sword of the Meek is a 2 casting 2 to equip equipment that when it's in your graveyard and you make a 1/1, you get to put it from your graveyard onto that creature. This means that that 1/1 just became a 2/3. And cards like Thopter Foundry, which is the real abuse of this card, allows you to sacrifice the Sword of the Meek in order to make a 1/1 and a life, and then put that Sword of the Meek back into play on said creature. This means that it puts the ability for more steady aggro decks that involve, like the Nakaddles, less opportunity to really win that match, as this is pretty one-sided, as you just make more and more dudes and gain more and more life, and you eventually just put your opponent out of reach. But when it's not that, and your opponent has answers, this becomes one of the most fun cards in Magic, and I really am disappointed that this hasn't come back any sooner. Alright guys, that's the Modern ban list so far. We'll cover the rest of it next week. But for now, as always, Jesus loves you.